Hello, I'm Tom Rooney, the Superintendent of Schools for the Lindsay Unified School District, and what I'm about to tell you could save lives. As educators, our number one priority is to ensure the safety and well-being of our learners and our coworkers. It's important that we understand the policies and procedures that we are responsible for carrying out in the event of an emergency. Regardless of the type of emergency that occurs, the initial responses by staff and learners will almost always include one or more of these four basic initial actions: duck and cover, evacuation, shelter in place, or lockdown. In this video, we will learn when to execute each of these actions and how to perform them well.
We should perform a duck and cover in the event of an earthquake, tornado, or any event where we must protect our learners and staff from falling or flying debris. If inside, staff will instruct learners to duck under their desks and cover their heads with their arms and hands. If outside, staff will instruct learners to drop to the ground, place their heads between their knees, and cover their heads with their arms and hands. We should maintain a safe distance from windows, power lines, tall buildings, or any other loose objects that could pose a potential safety risk. The shelter in place requires everyone on campus to find shelter indoors. We initiate a shelter in place procedure to protect learners and staff from severe weather, contaminated air, or other outside environment threats. During the execution of a shelter in place, everyone must remain inside the enclosed structures of the school, but will have the freedom to move from room to room if necessary. If outside when a shelter in place is initiated, learners and staff will proceed to their classrooms or into nearby classrooms or school buildings. Inside, staff will keep learners in the classroom until further instructions are given. If the outside air is contaminated, it is imperative that doors and windows are kept closed, and heating, cooling, and ventilation systems are shut down to keep contaminated air out of the buildings. A threat of violence on or near campus should trigger a lockdown procedure. The goal of a lockdown is to protect learners and staff from a violent threat and prevent intruders from entering occupied areas. If outside, learners will proceed to their classrooms or into nearby classrooms or school buildings. Unlike the shelter in place, a lockdown prohibits movement from one room to another. Staff will lock all doors and close any shades or blinds if safe to do so. Everyone will crouch down on the floor. If it is safe to do so, the staff should take roll and report any missing learners to administration as soon as it becomes possible to do so. Though your child may call or text that they are experiencing a lockdown, it is very important that you refrain from calling or coming to school. During a lockdown, all learners will be kept safely inside and will not be released to parents. Remember, parents and visitors are not allowed on campus during a lockdown. Staff and learners should not leave the safety of their secure classroom until receiving further instruction or an all clear from the principal or police. It is important to understand the differences between a shelter in place and a lockdown, as they are not simply substitutes for one another. Lockdown protects staff and learners from a human threat. Buildings are secured and everyone hides to avoid detection. Shelter in place protects from an environmental threat. Buildings do not need to be locked, and learners and staff may move about but must remain indoors. An evacuation should take place if the building becomes potentially unsafe. When a staff member becomes aware of an appropriate threat, such as a fire or a chemical leak, they should activate the fire alarm. Staff will instruct learners to evacuate the building using designated routes and assemble in their assigned assembly area. All staff should be aware of their school evacuation routes and meeting places. The staff will carry learner rosters and take attendance once class is in a safe location. All staff and learners should remain in their designated safe meeting place until given an all clear or further instruction. In the event of nearby law enforcement action or an intruder on campus, the initial school-wide action is to initiate a lockdown. However, individuals or groups who come in direct contact with an intruder must be prepared to take other immediate action. In such an instance, the individual must decide whether to run, hide, or fight. This is a life and death situation, and the actions they should take will be driven by their particular circumstance.
When an emergency occurs, it is up to all of us to implement the appropriate initial action. These 4 emergency initial actions will suffice for the vast majority of campus emergencies. Remember, our first priority is to keep our learners safe.